Imagine this, it's the end of World War II, the Allies have captured Berlin, and the world is celebrating the fall of the Nazi regime. But wait, what if I told you that the man responsible for it all, the most infamous dictator in history, didn't die in that crumbling bunker? What if Hitler didn't meet his end in 1945, but instead, made an epic escape to a secret hideaway, far from the eyes of the world? Picture this, a tropical retreat, somewhere in South America, where he could sip coffee, enjoy the sunshine, and perhaps even plot his next great comeback. Sounds like the plot of a spy thriller, right? But here's the kicker, it's a theory that has stuck around for decades, with countless rumors, photos, and alleged evidence that Hitler might have survived the war. So, what's the truth? Did the Führer really meet his end in Berlin, or did he slip through the cracks and make a daring getaway to a life of luxury in Argentina? Buckle up, because today we're diving deep into the mystery of Hitler's alleged escape, questioning everything you thought you knew about history. And trust me, this isn't your typical history lesson. On April 30, 1945, deep beneath the crumbling ruins of Berlin, Adolf Hitler was said to have met his end in the Führerbunker. As Soviet forces closed in on the city, Hitler, unwilling to face capture, allegedly took his own life alongside his longtime companion, Eva Braun. According to the official story, he bit down on a cyanide capsule while simultaneously shooting himself in the head. His body, along with Braun's, was then quickly carried outside, doused in petrol, and set ablaze by his most loyal followers. When the Soviets eventually stormed the bunker, they reportedly recovered charred remains, which they later claimed belonged to the Nazi dictator. However, from the very beginning, doubts and inconsistencies surrounded this account. The bodies were so badly burned that proper identification was nearly impossible, and the Soviet Union was notoriously secretive about the evidence they had collected. Joseph Stalin himself fueled the speculation by publicly stating that Hitler may have escaped. Meanwhile, reports of high-ranking Nazis fleeing Germany using secret escape routes, known as the Ratlins, began to emerge, making the idea of Hitler's possible survival all the more intriguing. As the years passed, declassified intelligence documents, eyewitness testimonies, and forensic inconsistencies further challenged the accepted version of events. Could the world's most infamous dictator have slipped through the cracks of history, vanishing into the shadows of South America? This episode will explore the theory that Hitler did not die in Berlin, but instead, escaped to Argentina, unraveling the evidence, questioning the official narrative, and examining the stories of those who claim to have seen him alive. By late April 1945, Berlin was a city in ruins. The once mighty Nazi capital had been reduced to a hellscape of bombed-out buildings, smoldering streets, and desperate citizens scavenging for survival. The Soviet Red Army, having launched its final offensive on the city, was tightening its grip, moving block by block with brutal efficiency. Artillery shells rained down without mercy, and the sound of gunfire echoed endlessly through the streets as German forces, many of them old men and teenagers, fought a hopeless battle. Inside the Führerbunker, Hitler and his remaining loyalists knew the war was lost. Communications with the outside world were breaking down, and food supplies were running dangerously low. The city's infrastructure had collapsed, and even members of the once mighty SS were attempting to flee, knowing that capture by the Soviets would mean certain death. Reports from within the bunker describe an atmosphere of despair, paranoia, and resignation, with Hitler growing increasingly detached and erratic in his final days. However, amidst the fog of war, the sheer scale of the chaos presented opportunities for deception and escape. Thousands of people were moving through Berlin's underground tunnels and secret passageways, many attempting to flee westward toward American and British forces, who were seen as a more merciful alternative to Soviet capture. With confusion at its peak and reports of lookalikes and body doubles being used to mislead enemies, some speculate that Hitler, or at least someone resembling him, could have taken advantage of the situation to slip away undetected. The official account suggests that Hitler's body was immediately burned beyond recognition, but given the widespread destruction and lack of reliable forensic identification at the time, the possibility remains that the world's most wanted man could have staged his own death and disappeared into the shadows of history. Was the chaos in Berlin simply the backdrop for Hitler's final stand, Or was it the perfect cover for one of the greatest escapes of all time? According to the widely accepted historical account, Adolf Hitler died by suicide on April 30, 1945, in his underground Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. As Soviet forces encircled the city, Hitler, realizing that the war was lost, chose to end his life rather than face capture. He spent his final hours in a dimly lit, claustrophobic bunker alongside his closest confidants, including his longtime companion Eva Braun, whom he had married just the day before. The official account states that Hitler prepared meticulously for his death. He tested cyanide capsules on his beloved dog, Blondie, to ensure their effectiveness. As the Soviets advanced closer, he and Braun retreated into his private quarters. Around 3:30 p.m., a gunshot was heard. Hitler had allegedly shot himself in the right temple while simultaneously biting down on a cyanide capsule. Eva Braun, sitting beside him, had taken cyanide as well. Their lifeless bodies were discovered shortly after by Hitler's personal valet and other bunker personnel. Following Hitler's suicide, his closest aides, including Otto Gunch and Joseph Goebbels, carried out his final orders, the immediate destruction of his body. His corpse, along with Braun's, was taken to a small garden outside the bunker's emergency exit, where they were placed in a shell crater, doused in gasoline, and set ablaze. This, Hitler believed, would prevent his body from being put on display by the Soviets, as had happened to Mussolini. When Soviet forces finally seized the Reich Chancellery on May 2, they discovered the remains of the charred bodies. Over the next few days, Soviet intelligence operatives claimed to have conducted forensic examinations and confirmed Hitler's death. However, instead of publicly displaying proof, the Soviets shrouded their findings in secrecy. Stalin himself reportedly cast doubt on the official story, suggesting that Hitler may have escaped, a statement that only fueled conspiracy theories for decades to come. With no definitive forensic evidence presented to the public, questions arose. Why did the Soviets not immediately release clear proof of Hitler's remains? Why were conflicting reports emerging, even among those in the bunker? And most importantly, could Hitler have used the chaos to orchestrate an elaborate deception? Despite the widespread acceptance of Hitler's death in the Führerbunker, numerous inconsistencies and unanswered questions have led many to challenge the official narrative. The most glaring issue is the lack of definitive forensic proof. The Soviets, who were the first to arrive at the site, took possession of the alleged remains, but rather than immediately sharing their findings with the world, they withheld crucial evidence for decades. This secrecy only fueled speculation that Hitler's death might not have occurred as reported. One of the most controversial aspects of the story is the condition of Hitler's body. The corpses that Soviet forces reportedly recovered were described as heavily burned, making identification nearly impossible. Unlike other prominent figures in Nazi Germany, whose deaths were well documented with photographic evidence, no undisputed images of Hitler's dead body exist. Some early reports even suggested that the Soviets had initially recovered multiple bodies before deciding on one that they claimed to be Hitler's. Further complicating the matter, the testimonies of those inside the bunker varied in key details. Some claimed Hitler had shot himself, while others said he had only taken cyanide. Some witnesses reported seeing blood on his couch, but forensic examinations never conclusively proved that it was his. Even the exact moment of his death was uncertain, with conflicting reports on the timeline. Given the psychological pressure and the chaotic circumstances, it's possible that eyewitness accounts were distorted, or that a deliberate effort was made to obscure the truth. Perhaps the most damaging blow to the official story came in 2009 when a forensic analysis was conducted on what was long believed to be Hitler's skull fragment, held in Soviet archives. DNA testing revealed that the fragment did not belong to Hitler at all, it belonged to a woman. This revelation cast serious doubt on the authenticity of the physical evidence and reignited theories that Hitler might have escaped. As World War II came to a close, the Allies faced a critical question: what should be done with the remaining Nazi elite? While some were captured and tried for war crimes, others vanished, either slipping into the shadows or being deliberately recruited by foreign governments. This is where two key operations come into play: Operation Paperclip and the rumored Odessa network. Operation Paperclip was a secret U.S. intelligence program designed to recruit top Nazi scientists, engineers, and military experts before they could fall into Soviet hands. These individuals, many of whom had direct ties to Hitler's regime, were quietly relocated to America, where they were given new identities and put to work on projects ranging from missile technology to biological warfare. Among the most famous recruits was Wernher von Braun, the mastermind behind the V-2 rocket program, who later played a crucial role in the U.S. space race. While the official purpose of Operation Paperclip was scientific advancement, some speculate that it may have also served as a cover for relocating high-ranking Nazis, including, perhaps, even Hitler himself. At the same time, an underground network known as Odessa, Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, or Organization of Former SS Members, was allegedly helping Nazi officials escape to South America. This secretive group, believed to be made up of former SS officers and Nazi sympathizers, is said to have established a network of safe houses, forged documents, and financial support to help war criminals flee Europe. Argentina, ruled by Juan Perón, a known admirer of fascism, became a major destination. Perón's government not only welcomed Nazi fugitives but actively assisted in their relocation, granting them new identities and protection. With the existence of Odessa and the fact that Nazi leaders like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele successfully escaped to Argentina, the idea that Hitler himself might have used the same channels is not far-fetched. If his most notorious officers could vanish into new lives abroad, why not the Führer himself? Could Operation Paperclip in Odessa have played a role in not only protecting Nazi scientists but in facilitating the greatest escape of all time? As the Third Reich crumbled in 1945, thousands of high-ranking Nazis and collaborators scrambled to escape Europe, fearing execution or imprisonment. Many of them successfully fled, thanks to a vast underground network known as the Ratlins, a series of secret escape routes that led from Germany to various safe havens, primarily in South America. These routes were facilitated by a combination of corrupt officials, sympathetic clergy, and intelligence operatives, raising the possibility that even Hitler himself could have used them to disappear. The Ratlins operated through multiple paths, but two primary corridors stand out. The first route led through Spain, where the fascist dictator Francisco Franco provided refuge to escaping Nazis before they continued to Argentina, Brazil, or Chile. The second major route ran through Italy, where the Vatican and certain Catholic clergy allegedly assisted Nazi fugitives by providing false passports and travel documents through the Red Cross. Many of these escapees were given passage to Argentina, a country whose leader, Juan Perón, had pro-Nazi sympathies and actively facilitated their resettlement. Argentina, in particular, became a sanctuary for infamous war criminals. Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, lived in Buenos Aires under an assumed identity until Mossad agents captured him in 1960. Joseph Mengele, the notorious doctor from Auschwitz, also found refuge in South America, successfully evading capture for decades. If men like Eichmann and Mengele, who were internationally known figures, could slip away so effectively, it raises a compelling question: could Hitler have done the same? Some theorists believe that Hitler, rather than committing suicide in the bunker, could have traveled through the Ratlins, using forged documents to escape into anonymity. Given the chaos of post-war Europe, the documented success of other Nazis fleeing, and the lack of concrete forensic evidence confirming Hitler's death, the possibility of his escape remains an open question. Was the Führerbunker truly his final resting place, or was it merely a distraction, allowing him to vanish into the uncharted wilderness of South America? By the late 1940s, Argentina had become a safe haven for hundreds, if not thousands, of former Nazis and SS officers. Under the leadership of Juan Perón, a known admirer of fascist ideology, the country actively welcomed German fugitives, providing them with new identities, financial aid, and protection from extradition. The sheer number of high-ranking Nazis who successfully relocated their lends credibility to the theory that Hitler himself could have used the same routes to escape. One of the most well-documented cases is Adolf Eichmann, the mastermind behind the logistics of the Holocaust. After the war, Eichmann fled to Argentina under the alias Ricardo Clement, living undetected for nearly 15 years before Israeli intelligence agency Mossad tracked him down and captured him in 1960. Another infamous figure was Joseph Mengele, the Auschwitz angel of death, who experimented on prisoners. Mengele lived in Argentina for years, moving between Paraguay and Brazil until his death in 1979. Beyond these individual cases, Argentina was home to entire German communities that shielded ex-Nazis. In cities like Bariloche, a scenic town in the Andes, German-speaking enclaves thrived, and many locals reported seeing men resembling Hitler's former associates. In some cases, these communities operated like self-contained German settlements, where Spanish was barely spoken, and Nazi memorabilia could be found decades after the war. Perhaps most intriguing is the evidence of secret Nazi compounds deep in the Argentine wilderness. In 2015, archaeologists discovered the ruins of what appeared to be a Nazi hideout in Teuquer, a remote jungle region near the Paraguayan border. The structures were built using German-style architecture and contained Nazi-era coins and artifacts, fueling speculation that Argentina was more than just a hiding place. It may have been a planned refuge for the Nazi elite in case of defeat. While official history insists that Adolf Hitler died in his Berlin bunker, numerous eyewitness accounts from Argentina suggest otherwise. Over the years, locals, former Nazis, and even intelligence reports have described sightings of a man resembling Hitler, living under an assumed identity in the remote regions of South America. Could these accounts be mere fabrications, or do they point to one of the greatest cover-ups in history? Sorry for interrupting. If you like this podcast, please give us a like, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe since we have a new video every week. Now let's roll back to the video. One of the most well-known claims comes from Abel Busti, an Argentine journalist who has spent decades researching Nazi escapees in South America. According to Busti, multiple residents of Bariloche, a German-Argentine town in Patagonia, reported seeing an elderly man with distinct features, short mustache, slicked back hair, and piercing eyes, living in seclusion in the years following World War II. Some even claimed that he was referred to as El Viejo Alemán, the Old German, and lived in a heavily guarded estate. Further accounts surfaced from former Nazi officers who allegedly interacted with Hitler after the war. One of the most controversial testimonies comes from Philip Citron, a former SS officer who told CIA informants in 1954 that he had met a man in Colombia who called himself Adolf Hitler and bore a striking resemblance to Hitler. Citron even produced a photograph of himself standing beside this man, who wore a military-style uniform. While skeptics dismiss the image as inconclusive, it remains one of the most compelling visual claims of Hitler's survival. Another bizarre but persistent story comes from a former German submarine officer who stated that he helped transport Hitler and Eva Braun to Argentina via U-boat. According to the account, the submarine surfaced near the Argentine coast in July 1945, where high-ranking Nazi officials disembarked. This coincides with confirmed historical events, as several German U-boats, including U-530 and U-977, surrendered in Argentina months after the war had officially ended, leading to speculation that they had already completed their secret missions before turning themselves in. While skeptics argue that these eyewitness accounts lack hard evidence, the sheer number of independent reports, combined with Argentina's known role in sheltering Nazi war criminals, raises an intriguing possibility. Could Hitler have been one of the many high-ranking Nazis who slipped through the cracks of history, living out his final years in the shadows of South America? Or are these stories simply the product of rumor and conspiracy? As conspiracy theories about Adolf Hitler's survival grew over the decades, one of the most significant sources of intrigue came from declassified government documents, particularly from the FBI. For years, the idea that Hitler might have escaped was relegated to the realm of fringe speculation, but when the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, released its files on Nazi fugitives in the 1970s, it revealed that American intelligence agencies had seriously considered the possibility that Hitler had not died in Berlin. These files, part of the FBI's broader investigation into Nazi war criminals, included reports from sources across the globe, many of which contained claims about sightings of Hitler in South America, especially Argentina. The most notable declassified document is a 1945 FBI report which records a tip-off from an informant who claimed to have seen Hitler in Argentina shortly after the end of the war. According to this report, the informant had personally spoken with a former Nazi officer who insisted that Hitler was alive and living in the remote regions of Patagonia. The FBI took these reports seriously enough to initiate investigations, but the trail quickly went cold, with no further conclusive evidence to substantiate the claim. Moreover, in the FBI's 1955 files, there were multiple references to sightings of high-ranking Nazi officials in South America, often accompanied by mentions of Hitler. These files reveal that the FBI had been keeping tabs on several suspected Nazi escapees who were reportedly residing in Argentina and other Latin American countries, raising the question, if such extensive resources were being spent to track down lower-ranking Nazi criminals, could the FBI have been investigating similar claims regarding Hitler? Some of these declassified documents also reveal the FBI's growing concerns about Nazi infiltration into South American governments. The U.S. had feared that the rise of fascist ideology in Argentina, coupled with the influx of former Nazis, could lead to destabilization in the region. The 1947 Project Paperclip investigations also reveal that the U.S. government was actively working to track down Nazis not only for their war crimes but also for their potential role in the development of the Soviet threat. Amidst all of this, references to Hitler's possible survival were scattered, including mentions of a mysterious figure named Adolf Hitler, a name that surfaced in several sources linked to South America. The FBI's declassified files contain no smoking gun, no photograph or definitive proof that Hitler was alive in Argentina. However, the fact that U.S. intelligence agencies took these reports seriously enough to investigate them reveals that they were not willing to completely rule out the possibility of Hitler's escape. The documents help to establish that, far from being a fringe theory, the notion of Hitler's survival and escape was something that caught the attention of intelligence agencies in the immediate aftermath of the war, leaving us to wonder whether they knew more than they were willing to disclose. One of the most significant pieces of evidence in the debate over Adolf Hitler's death is the skull fragment that has been claimed to be part of his remains. For decades, this fragment was considered conclusive proof of Hitler's demise, as it was reportedly recovered by Soviet forces shortly after the fall of Berlin. However, the controversy surrounding this fragment has only fueled suspicions that Hitler may have survived and escaped. The story of the skull fragment begins in the immediate aftermath of Hitler's alleged suicide. According to Soviet accounts, they discovered the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun in the garden outside the Führerbunker, where the bodies had been hastily burned. The Soviets then claimed to have recovered parts of Hitler's remains, including a skull fragment, and took them back to Moscow for further investigation. For decades, the Soviet Union kept these remains under lock and key, making it impossible for outside experts to examine them. This secrecy only added to the suspicion surrounding the legitimacy of the remains. It wasn't until after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the Russian Federal Archives began to release some of their previously classified documents and materials, including Hitler's supposed skull fragment. In 2000, researchers were granted access to the fragment, and in 2009, a team of scientists conducted a DNA analysis on the bone fragment to confirm its origin. To the shock of many, the results revealed that the skull fragment did not belong to Hitler, it was actually part of a female skull. This revelation caused an uproar, as it directly contradicted the Soviet claim that they had recovered Hitler's remains. The findings led to widespread questions about the authenticity of the Soviet Union's investigation and the handling of Hitler's remains. How could such a monumental mistake have occurred, especially when the Soviet Union had maintained such secrecy around Hitler's remains for so long? Some have argued that the fragment may have been mistaken for Hitler's, while others believe that it may have been planted deliberately to bolster the official narrative. The fact that it was a woman's skull raised the unsettling possibility that the Soviets had never recovered Hitler's remains at all, and that the skull fragment was merely a ruse to cover up the truth. In the years following this controversy, there were renewed claims that Hitler's actual body had been moved before the Soviets arrived. Some theories suggest that Hitler's remains were removed from Berlin in the days following his death and hidden, either by loyal Nazi officers or through covert operations. Others propose that his body was taken to a remote location and disposed of in such a way that it would never be found. With the skull fragment now discredited, the mystery of Hitler's remains unsolved, keeping the debate over his survival alive. The skull fragment controversy stands as one of the most enduring and puzzling aspects of the Hitler escape theories. If the fragment wasn't Hitler's, where is his body? And if the Soviets couldn't even identify the Führer's remains, could it be possible that he never died in the bunker at all and managed to escape? This unresolved issue continues to serve as a major piece of the puzzle for those who believe that Hitler evaded justice by fleeing to South America or another safe haven. The question of why Adolf Hitler would choose to escape rather than face capture or death remains a key point in the debate surrounding the theory of his survival. Given his deeply entrenched ideology and the fate that awaited him as the ultimate villain in history, why would Hitler go into hiding? And even more intriguingly, why would he remain silent, never making an appearance or claiming responsibility for the atrocities he orchestrated? To understand this, we must consider both his mindset and the political circumstances surrounding the end of World War II. 1. A desire to avoid public humiliation. One of the most plausible reasons Hitler might have chosen to escape and remain silent is the sheer magnitude of his hubris. As the leader of the Nazi regime, he built his persona around absolute power, the idea of German supremacy, and the belief that he was a figure of historical destiny. To face public capture or humiliation would have been unthinkable for someone like Hitler, who had long envisioned himself as a near-messianic figure destined to reshape the world order. His escape could have been motivated by a desire to avoid being paraded in front of the world's media, enduring the humiliation of being dragged before a court of law, or even subjected to a public trial like those of his top officials at the Nuremberg trials. The idea of death, on his own terms, may have been more appealing than the certainty of public disgrace. 2. A strategic retreat to fight another day. Hitler's extreme pride and unwillingness to accept failure could also have motivated him to escape in order to fight another day. While the war was lost, the Nazi cause was far from extinguished in the minds of many loyalists. Hitler's escape might have been seen as a chance to regroup, to ensure the survival of his ideology, and perhaps even to plan for a future resurgence of the far right in Europe or South America. The idea that Hitler, or his loyalists, would want to keep his legacy alive in secret is consistent with the post-war emergence of underground Nazi networks like Odessa. His escape could have been framed as a tactical decision to avoid capture, allowing him to preserve the myth of the Führer for his followers while remaining out of the reach of Allied forces and the Soviet Union. 3. The influence of Nazi networks and supporters. Hitler's ability to escape and remain silent can also be attributed to the robust network of loyalists and sympathizers who supported him even after the fall of the Third Reich. The existence of groups like Odessa, which helped Nazi war criminals escape to South America, suggests that a well-organized underground movement was ready to assist in his flight. After the war, some of Hitler's most devoted supporters were eager to protect him, believing that his ideals should continue to influence the world. For these loyalists, keeping Hitler alive and hidden was paramount, as they viewed him as the central figure of their ideological cause. The support from Nazi sympathizers, especially in countries like Argentina, could have made it easier for Hitler to evade capture and remain out of sight for the rest of his life. 4. The legacy of the Führer. Another key consideration is Hitler's obsession with his legacy. Throughout his time in power, Hitler was intensely focused on how history would view him. He believed in the greatness of his mission and thought of himself as a figure destined to leave a lasting mark on the world. The notion of dying ignominiously, either by suicide or at the hands of his enemies, was perhaps too much for him to bear. By escaping and living out his days in secret, Hitler could have believed he would preserve his legacy, allowing the myth of his leadership to endure in the minds of his followers. Remaining silent might have been part of a broader effort to ensure that his ideals were never completely wiped from history, something that could only be achieved by avoiding the ultimate defeat and maintaining a sense of mystique. 5. Fear of retribution and vengeance. Lastly, the horrors that Hitler had perpetrated during the war meant that he was one of the most wanted men in the world. The fear of retribution from both the Allies and those who had suffered under Nazi rule would have been another powerful motivator for him to remain silent and hidden. If Hitler were captured, he would likely have been subjected to a public trial and potentially executed, bringing an end to his reign of terror and ideology. His desire to avoid the fate of men like Mussolini, who was publicly hanged and mutilated, may have driven him to take extreme measures to disappear, rather than face retribution or the ultimate punishment for his crimes. In the end, if Hitler did indeed escape, it would likely have been motivated by a combination of his desire to avoid disgrace, preserve his legacy, and ensure the survival of his ideology. By vanishing into the shadows, he could keep the myth of the Führer alive, hoping that one day, in some form or another, he might rise again. His silence, whether from fear or pride, would have been a strategy to evade the total erasure of his influence and to maintain his control over his own narrative, something no public trial or execution could have afforded him. As the theory that Adolf Hitler escaped to South America continues to captivate conspiracy theorists and historians alike, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that keeps the debate alive are the alleged photos and artifacts that reportedly show Hitler in Argentina, or at least suggest his presence there. These items, ranging from photographs to objects, have surfaced over the years, sparking curiosity and fueling claims that Hitler did indeed survive the fall of the Third Reich and flee to a secret life in Argentina. One of the most widely circulated pieces of evidence is a photograph allegedly taken in the 1950s in Bariloche, an Argentine town with a significant German expatriate community. The photograph purportedly shows an elderly man resembling Adolf Hitler, standing with a group of individuals, but the man's face is partially obscured. Critics and supporters alike have debated its authenticity for years. Some claim that the man in the photo is an old Nazi officer or an individual who looks strikingly similar to Hitler, while others insist it is, in fact, the Führer himself, living incognito in the South American wilderness. Despite the blurry nature of the photograph and the lack of concrete identification, it remains one of the most talked about images in the ongoing investigation into Hitler's escape. There are also accounts of artifacts and Nazi memorabilia being found in Argentina that seem to point to a continued Nazi presence long after the war. In towns like Bariloche, locals have reported the discovery of German-style objects, such as military medals, uniforms, and even swastika-emblazoned items, in private homes or hidden caches. These artifacts suggest that former Nazis, or at least those sympathetic to their cause, were living in these regions well into the 1950s and 1960s. The presence of such items raises the question, if these objects remained in Argentina, is it possible that Hitler himself had some involvement with them either by providing them or by continuing to harbor Nazi ideals? The connection between these artifacts and Hitler's alleged presence is, of course, speculative, but it adds to the mystery surrounding his purported escape. In addition to these items, there are other stories about Nazi symbols and architecture being found in remote Argentine locations. One such example is the discovery of a supposed Nazi compound in the jungle region near the Paraguayan border, a place where many Nazis were believed to have relocated after the war. This compound contained structures that resembled German military architecture, leading some to speculate that this site was once a secret hideout for high-ranking Nazis, including possibly Hitler himself. The idea that such a secluded place could have served as a retreat for a figure like Hitler suggests that the Nazis went to great lengths to create a safe haven in South America, one where they could continue their operations and ideology without interference from the outside world. More evidence comes in the form of testimonies from locals and former Nazi officers who claim to have seen Hitler in Argentina. Some of these individuals described encounters with an elderly man who resembled Hitler, speaking in German or exhibiting other behaviors consistent with the Führer's persona. The stories often came from residents of small towns or military personnel who may have had direct ties to the German community in Argentina, making their accounts seem more credible. These testimonies, though unverifiable, paint a picture of a Hitler who was living quietly in the shadows, avoiding public attention while continuing to influence his former supporters. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the combination of these photos, artifacts, and testimonies serves as a tantalizing piece of the puzzle for those who believe Hitler escaped to South America. While each individual piece of evidence may be open to interpretation or skepticism, together they present a compelling narrative that the world's most infamous dictator may have managed to evade death and lived out his final years in Argentina, undetected by the international community. Whether these claims are true or merely the result of sensational stories, they continue to fuel the debate over one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. Did Adolf Hitler really die in the Führerbunker, or did he escape to live another life, far from the reach of history? While the theory that Adolf Hitler escaped to South America after World War II continues to capture the imagination of many, it has been met with significant skepticism and counterarguments from historians, researchers, and experts who assert that there is no credible evidence to support such a claim. These counterarguments focus on the available historical records, the lack of physical evidence, and the logical inconsistencies within the escape narrative. The debate surrounding Hitler's death is not simply a matter of what might have happened but also of understanding the broader context in which these theories have emerged. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence used to debunk the escape theory is the official Soviet investigation into Hitler's death. After the fall of Berlin, Soviet forces claimed to have recovered the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun in the garden of the Führerbunker. Soviet authorities conducted an autopsy on the remains, and several reports from Soviet officials, including NKVD, Soviet secret police, documents, described the identification of Hitler's remains and the subsequent burning of the bodies to prevent them from being paraded around by the Allies. Although the Soviets were notoriously secretive, their records, combined with testimonies from soldiers who allegedly saw the bodies, provide a significant counterpoint to claims that Hitler escaped. Soviet officials were adamant that they had verified the identity of the bodies, and while the Russian government's release of documents in the 1990s regarding the remains was controversial, they never officially endorsed the idea of Hitler's survival. The theory that he escaped to South America simply contradicts the official Soviet records, which document the meticulous handling of Hitler's remains. Another key counterargument against the escape theory is the logistical improbability of such a daring escape. The Führerbunker, where Hitler supposedly died, was located in the heart of Berlin, and the city was surrounded by Allied forces by the time Hitler and his inner circle were reportedly preparing to take their own lives. The idea that Hitler could have escaped unnoticed in the chaos of Berlin's final days seems highly unlikely. The Soviet Red Army had effectively sealed off the city, and it would have been incredibly difficult for any high-profile individual, especially someone as famous as Hitler, to leave undetected, especially under the conditions of total defeat. Moreover, the fact that no credible eyewitnesses or reliable sources ever reported seeing Hitler leave Berlin casts serious doubt on the escape narrative. The absence of a well-documented escape route or a solid plan for leaving the city under fire further weakens the claim that Hitler fled. The absence of tangible evidence to support the escape theory is another major point raised by critics. Despite the numerous theories and rumors that suggest Hitler may have escaped to Argentina, no physical evidence has been found to definitively confirm this. For example, the infamous skull fragment that was recovered by Soviet authorities and later tested in the 2000s has been conclusively shown to belong to a woman, not Hitler, raising doubts about the authenticity of the remains the Soviets claim to have identified as his. Despite this, no conclusive proof has emerged that points to Hitler's survival or presence in South America. The lack of a body, clear photographs, or documents supporting the escape narrative leaves the theory grounded in speculation rather than verifiable facts. If Hitler had truly escaped, it is reasonable to assume that more substantial evidence would have surfaced, particularly in the decades following the end of the war. Furthermore, many researchers argue that the idea of Hitler's escape is fueled by historical revisionism and the need to reconcile the failure of the Nazi regime with the desire for closure. The theory that Hitler survived allows people to create a narrative in which he evaded justice, which may feel more satisfying than accepting that his death was a relatively mundane and unceremonious event. The notion of a grand escape feeds into a sense of intrigue and suspense, but it overlooks the practicalities of the situation. By all accounts, Hitler was physically and mentally deteriorating during the final days of the war, and his behavior in the bunker suggests he was not in a position to orchestrate a successful escape. His decision to take his own life rather than face capture, as stated by multiple witnesses in the bunker, also points to his acceptance of death as a final end to his reign. Sorry for interrupting. If you like this podcast, please give us a like, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe since we have a new video every week. Now let's roll back to the video. The narrative of Hitler's death, which, according to the available evidence, took place in the Führerbunker, has been solidified through the accounts of those who were there, including his personal staff and other high-ranking Nazi officials. Testimonies from people like Hans Fritzsch, a key Nazi official, and others who were in the bunker consistently support the idea that Hitler died on April 30, 1945. These first-hand accounts do not leave much room for the possibility of an escape. Additionally, the logistics of moving a body in a city under siege by Soviet forces would have been nearly impossible to carry out without detection. The escape theory, therefore, fails to align with the reality of Hitler's circumstances at the time of his death. Lastly, the story of Hitler's escape to Argentina has been fueled in part by an appeal to conspiracy thinking, which often involves interpreting ambiguous or incomplete evidence as proof of a larger hidden truth. It is common for conspiracy theories to latch onto small inconsistencies or gaps in the historical record and use them to construct elaborate narratives. In this case, the conspiracy that Hitler escaped to South America plays into the larger narrative of Nazi survival in Argentina, which is fueled by reports of former Nazi officials, German expatriates, and alleged sightings of Hitler. However, these reports often lack verifiable evidence and are frequently dismissed as hearsay or misidentifications of other individuals. The fact that no conclusive proof has emerged after decades of investigation suggests that the escape theory is more myth than reality. In conclusion, the theory that Adolf Hitler survived the war and escaped to South America remains highly speculative and unsupported by hard evidence. The counterarguments presented, ranging from Soviet autopsy reports and logistical difficulties to the lack of physical evidence and eyewitness testimony, make it unlikely that Hitler managed to escape the grasp of the Allies and live out his days in hiding. While conspiracy theories continue to circulate, the weight of historical documentation and credible testimonies overwhelmingly support the conclusion that Hitler died in the Führerbunker in 1945. The theory that Adolf Hitler escaped to South America after World War II has captivated the imaginations of many for decades. It has become a topic of fascination for conspiracy theorists, journalists, and historians alike, offering an alternative narrative to the widely accepted account of Hitler's death. From alleged photographs of an elderly man resembling Hitler in Argentina to claims of Nazi artifacts being found in remote locations, these theories have spurred ongoing debates about the true fate of one of history's most notorious figures. However, despite the persistence of these theories and the tantalizing nature of the supposed evidence, there is no concrete proof to support the idea that Hitler survived the war and escaped to South America. The overwhelming body of evidence points to the fact that Hitler died in his bunker on April 30, 1945, by suicide. Soviet records, forensic investigations, and eyewitness testimonies from individuals who were present in the Führerbunker at the time consistently support the conclusion that Hitler took his own life, along with his wife, Eva Braun. The Soviet Union conducted autopsies on the remains and documented their findings meticulously, further solidifying the claim that Hitler died in Berlin. While there are those who argue that the Soviets were not forthcoming with their information and that their findings could be questioned, the lack of a credible alternative explanation for Hitler's death remains a significant challenge for those who believe he survived. Moreover, the logistical difficulties of Hitler's escape from Berlin, a city surrounded by Allied forces and under heavy siege, make the idea of him evading capture implausible. The final days of the war in Berlin were chaotic, with the city crumbling under the pressure of advancing Soviet troops. Any attempt to escape would have been fraught with danger and almost certainly would have been detected by the numerous soldiers and civilians in the area. The absence of any reliable eyewitness accounts of Hitler leaving the city, coupled with the fact that no body or substantial evidence of his survival has ever been found, casts serious doubt on the notion that he escaped to Argentina. The alleged photographs, artifacts, and testimonies claiming to show Hitler in South America have failed to provide irrefutable proof of his survival. Many of these claims are based on circumstantial evidence, misidentifications, or hearsay rather than hard, verifiable facts. For instance, photographs that allegedly show Hitler living in Argentina are often blurry or inconclusive, and the individuals in them have never been definitively identified as the Führer. The discovery of Nazi memorabilia in Argentina, while intriguing, does not constitute evidence of Hitler's presence and can be explained by the fact that many former Nazis and Nazi sympathizers did indeed flee to South America after the war, establishing networks like Odessa to assist in their escape. However, these individuals were not necessarily connected to Hitler directly, and the presence of Nazi symbols does not prove that Hitler himself survived. Furthermore, the counterarguments and debunking attempts from historians, researchers, and experts are compelling. The consistency of the historical record, the lack of tangible evidence, and the implausibility of Hitler's escape all point toward a conclusion that aligns with the official narrative of his death. The autopsy reports, the testimonies of those who witnessed his death, and the forensic evidence from the Soviet investigation leave little room for doubt that Hitler's life ended in the Führerbunker. The idea of his escape, while intriguing, is largely based on conspiracy thinking and the desire for a more sensational and dramatic conclusion to his story. While the idea of Hitler's survival continues to be a subject of fascination, it is essential to approach such theories with skepticism and a critical eye. The reality of Hitler's death is far less sensational but no less significant. The fall of the Nazi regime and the subsequent defeat of the Axis powers marked the end of an era of unprecedented destruction and suffering. For those who suffered under Nazi rule, the knowledge that Hitler met his end in Berlin brought a sense of closure, even if that closure was painful. The persistence of the escape theory may be fueled by a desire to believe that justice was not fully served, or that the story of Hitler's demise could be more dramatic than the historical facts suggest. But the weight of evidence points to the conclusion that Hitler did not escape, he died in Berlin, a cowardly end to a man who had once considered himself a godlike figure in world history. Ultimately, the theory that Hitler survived the war and escaped to South America does not stand up to the scrutiny of historical research and forensic analysis. While it may continue to intrigue and inspire conspiracy theories, the truth remains clear: Adolf Hitler died in the Führerbunker on April 30, 1945. The persistence of the escape theory serves as a reminder of how myths and legends can evolve in the wake of real-world events, fueled by a desire to fill in the gaps of historical knowledge. However, the factual evidence is overwhelmingly against the idea that Hitler lived on in hiding, and it is time to accept the reality of his death as the historical record has documented it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye.